Hey guys, really been enjoying the discussion so far regarding the 808 style tuned kicks, but I wanted to throw my 2 cents in for how I would do this with a few different tools: operator, massive, and SubBoomBass. I'm going to move a little fast. It seems like everybody in the thread so far has a pretty good idea about synthesis and the different terms, and my last attempt at this video was like 12 minutes in before I even got past operator. So I'm going to move quickly. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to leave a comment, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I can, particularly if it's something about routing or just if you see me making a move or a change that I don't explain, just let me know, and I will try and get to that. So starting out with operator, this is basically what Michael was doing with the initialized operator patch. I'm going to take us back to square one here. And the song I was trying to emulate was Shit from the Future album, and the bass line is real simple. It's in the key of D sharp minor, 100 beats per minute, and this isn't going to sound much like it, it's just a sine wave, but here's the pattern. Okay, so not very exciting so far. It's just a sine wave, like I said. First thing I'm going to do is go over here and activate the pitch envelope, which is what's primarily responsible for shaping the sound. That's what gives the 808 kick drum its characteristic sweep from a high frequency to a low frequency as a pitch envelope. I'm going to move the transpose down a little bit to get us in the right ballpark, and then I'm going to actually activate the pitch envelope itself by turning up its percentage. Over here in the pitch envelope settings, the peak controls how high it starts out before it sweeps back down to 0. So I'm just going to kind of tune that by ear. That sounds pretty good. And then I'm going to shorten the decay to make it a little punchier. So it only takes about 100 milliseconds to get from plus 32 semitones down to 0. And then again, we've offset that by an octave. So we're actually ending up at minus 12 here. So that's pretty good, but it's not. It sounds pretty choppy. The tones in the actual song in the Future album were very long. They were very sustained. So we need to go over to the oscillator itself and increase the release time. So that sounds a little more like it, but now the notes are overlapping with each other. When it jumps up to the octave or up to the fifth, those notes sustain out even over the lower octave when it goes back down to that, and I'm not digging the way that sounds. They're fighting with each other. So if we go over here into the master settings and we turn the voices from 6 down to 1, that means the synth can only produce one tone at a time. This oscillator can only produce one pitch at a time. So when a new note gets sustained, even if it's in the middle of that decay portion of the envelope, that 2.2 seconds while it's ringing out, it'll cut that note off and then jump up to the higher or the lower note so that they're not fighting with each other. And generally that's something you want on the low end. You don't want your bass fighting. You want one defined pitch to be cutting through and really rattling those subs. So that's more or less the basic 808 type of sound there with just a sine wave. But there's a lot more than just a sine wave going on throughout the Future album. There's a lot of harmonic content. Different people in the thread discussed a lot of different options, adding saturation, using maybe like Renaissance bass or max bass to add some harmonics. Since we're already in a synthesizer anyway and we've got 3 other oscillators to play with, I'm a fan of just using the inherent characteristics of the synthesizer to add some additional harmonic content in there besides just that sine wave. I know everybody was saying, or a lot of folks were saying, that the sine wave hits pure, but to me that's not the strongest type of sound. I mean, the reason that certain synthesizers have a reputation for having a really fat bass sound is usually because they have more than one oscillator trying to produce the same pitch or octaves of each other, and the ever so slight detunings or differences between those pitches fatten up the sound versus just a pure sine wave. Now this is an FM synth, which means that these oscillators modulate each other. FM stands for frequency modulation, and depending on the configuration that you choose here on the master page, that happens in different ways. Now we can turn the modulation off all together and just have the 4 oscillators running in parallel, and I'll start there. And it just sounds like it gets louder. They're both sine waves. You can see over here in the oscillator, they're both sine waves tuned to the same pitch, so they just add together. Now I can go over here on the coarse tuning and I can turn that up by an octave, and now we'll hear it stand out a little bit more in the mix. And we do have independent control over here on the pitch envelope. We can tell it to modulate A but not B. So we take that sweep off of there, and then when we bring A back in, that's got a little bit of punch. So that's an option that you got for sound design. Now I prefer the sound of having these actually modulate each other, and you can hear the frequency modulation happening there. Now it's a lot more going on than just two sine waves that are octaves of each other, because there's a frequency modulation relationship between these two oscillators. You're hearing a lot of sidebands signals that are multiples of those two frequencies. Now, for our purposes, I think it sounds a lot cooler rather than having this be double the frequency, which is an octave up, have it be 0.5 or half the frequency, which is an octave down. All of a sudden, we've got a real fat analog sounding bass line there, and then the level of the B oscillator is what controls the amount of modulation. So all the way down, we've got a pure sine wave from oscillator A, and then I'll turn it up a little bit to give it some teeth. So that to me is sounding pretty good, and then you can see it's relatively quiet on the meter, so I'll turn it up to get it up into the right ballpark. Okay, so next I was going to do the same thing with Massive, using the Kick Me in the Subs preset, which I'd recommended earlier. If you go to the browser page and you filter all the presets by first drums and then type kick drum, it narrows it down to just a few presets, and I like this Kick Me in the Subs. A lot of the concepts that we were just looking at apply here, such as the pitch envelope. We can see over here in our oscillator sections, we've only got the first oscillator activated, and it's tuned down to -12, which is similar to what we did with our -12 offset in the pitch envelope section on operator. And then you can see here that the pitch of that oscillator is being modulated by modulator number 2, which is an envelope in this case. And the maximum value of that modulation is +64, which is about 5.5 octaves up. And we can see over here that the decay time of the envelope is being modulated by macro number 8, which is mod decay. So if I make that a little longer, you can hear the effect just like what we were hearing in operator. And if I turn down the depth of that modulation, I think we ended up in 32 over on operator. You can hear it's a lot closer to that same sound. And if I shorten the decay time, now we're getting back in the ballpark. Now, we had the same problem as before, which is that the sound is cutting off. It's not sustaining out and filling in the gaps between the notes. And that happens over here in the amplifier section, which is being modulated by envelope number 4. If we increase the release time, same exact technique, then we're getting a similar sound. Now, this is a subtractive synthesizer, which means that oscillators generate the sound, and then filters are used to subtract or take away frequencies from those, and that's what provides that's what results, in the sound that you hear. These oscillators don't have a frequency modulation relationship between them the way that the ones in operator do, but we do have a modulation oscillator, which can be used for ring modulation, which is exactly the same thing as frequency modulation. It just has a different name to it. If we switch this on, I'll do the same thing as before, which is to take my modulation oscillator down an octave below the oscillator that I'm trying to modulate, and then I'm going to assign ring modulation to the destination of oscillator 1, and then I'll play around with the amount of ring modulation until I get something that should sound similar to what we just were hearing in operator a minute ago. So that's our sine wave. Actually, let me stop for a second. That's not a sine wave. That is actually somewhere in between a sine and a triangle wave. Most of the oscillators in Massive crossfade between one shape of an oscillator to another. And right now, this is set up to modulate between a sine and a triangle. You can see that macro control 1 down here has been assigned to wavetable position, and that's what sweeps us. All the way over on the left side would be a sine, all the way over on the right side would be a triangle, and macro 1 is set up to sweep us all the way through this. So I'm going to pull it all the way back down to a sine, a pure sine. Now, we didn't hear much of a difference, and that's because the filter is taking out most of those high frequencies. But if I bypass the filter temporarily, now you'll hear that buzz from the harmonics that are added by the triangle wave. So lots of sound design possibilities there. I'll put us back with the filter and then turn the modulation oscillator back up. So not exactly the same thing, but similar. And sorry, muted my vocal mic for a moment there. And it's because of the modulation, the frequency modulation that's happening, that we're getting those additional fatter frequencies there, the octaves and the octaves above, the octaves below, and then there's some fifths in there that kind of toughen it out. It almost turns it into like a bass power chord, that octave, low octave, fifth, and then high octave. It's that interplay between the low octave, the fifth, and the high octave, and the harmonics of those different frequencies that give us that toughness, that added feeling of weight on the low end there. So we'll jump over to SubBoomBass real quick. Same exact pattern again, same MIDI pattern. And that's the default preset here. I'm going to jump into the SubBass presets bank and just jump through a few of these to give you an idea of what the sounds are. Again, I mean, it's not just a synthesizer, it's based on samples as well. And you know, anything that uses samples in place of oscillators, there's going to be some sound quality issues versus the pure synthesizer. But I love the presets. There's so many good sounds here just right under my fingers. I'm going to play you a couple of them. So lots of different types of sounds. I think where I ended up that I liked the best was over here on Tune Kick Boosted. If I come back here, we'll see a lot of the same ideas up here. This first oscillator actually uses a sample of Tune Kick, but we could just as easily choose a sine wave if we want to. And it also gives us the option of a sub-oscillator. If we turn it to the left, that gives us a sine wave. That's an octave below the frequency of the tune kick. If we turn it to the right, it gives us a square wave. So you hear more buzz there because the square wave's got harmonics. The sine wave doesn't. It's a pure tone. But you can hear a little bit of that, really fattens out the sound. Now, I'm going to go over here. I'm going to turn the sub-os back off, and then go over here and play with the release time for a minute. And this is one of the limitations of a sample-based synthesizer, is that no matter how long I push the release, it's never going to have any more audio data to work with than the sample. The sample's going to run out eventually. So you can see I pushed the release all the way up to 16.4 seconds there, and clearly it's not that long. But if I pull the sub-oscillator in, you can hear it ringing out for the full duration of the release, because that's made by an oscillator producing a sine wave rather than a sample being played back. So between those two, the sample called tune kick and then the sub-oscillator sine wave, they stack up to make a pretty nice bass sound. And down here in the modulator section, you can see that there is the destination is semi-1, which is semitones on oscillator 1, and it's a pitch envelope. It's exactly the same thing we were looking at in the other two synths. The amount here is measured. You can see up here, free envelope amount, if you watch that section. is exactly the same as before. It's a certain amount of semitones that it launches up, and then it takes a certain amount of time to get back down to 0. So similar concepts at play. One of the things that I really like about the SubBoomBass, which the others don't have quite as simple of an approach to, although you can certainly get there, is over here the unison section as well as the portamento. Portamento is like a glide from one pitch to the next. And I'm going to turn it on for a second here so you can hear it kind of squirm around. So it's a good way to take a drums type of a sound, but get a little bit of squirminess in there, like you would with a bass line from a synth, using the pitch bend wheel, or like an actual bass player would do slides or whatever. It just gives a little bit more flavor in there. And then also for the unison, that just basically stacks duplicates of oscillators on top of each other that are slightly detuned from each other, and you can control the detune amount using the unison detune. And you can hear as I turn the detune amount up, the detuned oscillators start fighting with each other, and past a certain point it actually makes it less fat because they're phasing with each other and they're canceling each other out. But a little bit goes a long way towards what I was talking about earlier in recreating that sort of classic analog style multi-oscillator sound where they're ever so slightly detuned from each other. The operator has a similar feature. I think it's called spread, yeah. And you can see over here the hint section tells us if spread is turned up, the synthesizer uses 2 detuned voices per note, one each on the left and right stereo channels to create chorusing sounds, which is similar to what we were just doing with SubBoomBass, except it's in stereo. So I'll play that for a second. And I'll drop us down an octave. Again, too much of it, and it starts phasing, and they cancel each other out, but a little bit of goes a long way. So just one last thing I wanted to show you is I had messed around with this a little bit earlier and did some variations on kind of the same techniques I was showing you there. And what I found I liked best was actually a layer, a combination of operator and SubBoomBass. To me, they're hitting real nice in combination, better than either one does on its own. So they're both doing something a little different, but they round each other out very nicely. And the last thing I was going to mention, one of the last things is for saturation. There are a lot of different ways you can do this, but a great plugin is FabFilter Saturn, which is a multi-band saturator. They've got a great preset called 808 Designer. And there is separate overdrive characteristics for the low band, the mid band, and the high band. And it's kind of set up to sound good on a low-end kick drum. So you can hear I can add some harmonic distortion to the lowest portion of the kick drum without messing up that punchy transient in the mid range or the high end there. So that's a nice tool. Again, used in combination with another synth, can really give you a nice sound. I was going to show you one other routing thing. I threw a kick and a snare on top of this real quick, just to show you one technique, which is to use a compressor. I've got the operator and the SubBoomBass grouped together. They're both going through this channel in sort of a submic submix configuration, and I put a compressor on the submix and activated the sidechain feature, and it's listening to the kick drum channel over here, which causes the bass tone to kind of duck out of the way of the kick drum. The release time is about 50 milliseconds here, so that means that it's just going to duck down for about 50 milliseconds and scoot out of the way of the low end of the kick sample, and then come back up to fill in the gap in between. I'll pull it down a lot so you can hear what I'm talking about. But it's a good way to make a little bit of room for the kick so the kick still punches, and you can leave some of that low end in the kick drum sample, but they don't need to, but they won't be fighting with each other as much on the low end. Somebody mentioned tuning your kick drums, and that's a great thing to do to match it to the key of the song. But with these melodic bass lines, a lot of times you're going to be playing a different note than the actual fundamental pitch of the song. You don't necessarily want your kick to follow that melodic pattern, so it's good for the bass line to duck out of the way just for a few milliseconds while the kick is hitting, so that those sub-bass frequencies don't compete with each other. And then as soon as the kick gets out of the way, the bass just rises right up to fill in the gap. I do also, by the way, I was going to mention, I have some limiting on here and an SSL bus compressor on the stereo bus. So that's responsible for part of the sound that you're hearing. I'm getting just a couple of dB of compression out of the bus compressor there, and then I'm kind of putting the smackdown on it on the L2 just to get us up to a competitive volume level. But there's definitely going to be some type of mastering limiting applied to a hip hop track, like in the style on that Future album, and they're going to have some type of bus compression as well, which is going to help that kick and the bass sit together in the mix. So not the most exciting sound in the world, but on the low end, that'll get you close. And if you can program the rest of the beat around there and come up with some interesting samples, that'll make sure that the low end is hitting hard. The way all those different sounds are combining together will sound real good if you're standing right next to the 18s. It'll be pushing a lot of air, but they're all tuned consistently with each other, and they're going to be combining together in a way that's complementary rather than a way that fights with each other. So I hope that helps. If you have any questions, please hit me up in the comments. Thanks, guys.